Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on International Women's Day. We are really excited to be here and even more excited to hear from our panel today, who are going to be answering some questions around their own personal career journeys, the triumphs and challenges that they faced. We're obviously going to talk about the impact of COVID after the year that we've all had, and we will specifically look at the International Women's Day theme this year, which is all around choose to challenge. So our hope today is that we will explore, I guess, how everyone has a role in forging more towards gender balance, gender parity. And our hope is, and maybe some things for everyone perhaps to think about in the next hour, is really around the choose to challenge theme, in that a more alert or challenged world brings challenge. And obviously that brings change. And I guess, you know, that's very much what the theme is very much about this year. But we also kind of want to really highlight that very much the rise of women is not about the fall of men. It's much more about gender balance, gender parity being a human issue, not a woman's issue. So we're going to explore some mindsets, some behaviors, some things that we can all partake in. And we will look at hopefully some stereotypes, some biases that, you know, undoubtedly we've made huge progress in, but there's still very much more that we need to do. So as I said, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Elaine, Amy, Katy and Claire. They've got brilliant stories. You know, they're formidable women who I'm sure you're going to take some real stories from today, and hopefully you'll have one or two personal takeaways. What I'd like to do now is everyone's going to briefly introduce themselves. That will hopefully paint a little bit of a picture, so when you're hearing stories later, they will give a little bit more meaning. So Claire, I'll probably pass over to you first, if that's okay. And then if we follow that by Katy, Elaine and Amy, that would be brilliant. Thanks, Claire.
Afternoon, everybody. Nice to meet you all virtually. I've been in IT all my working life. I started off as a developer and I've kind of ended up managing that area of the business now. To say I'm passionate about IT and passionate about mentoring women and getting them involved in IT is an understatement. And I'm hoping to have a fun conversation with my fellow panelists today.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you. I'd also like to say hello and welcome everybody. Nice to meet you all virtually. So a bit like Claire, I have also been a career finance person. I chose to be an accountant at about age 16, which is quite unusual, I think. Also hugely passionate about you know, helping women in the workplace, and particularly in startup arena. I think venture capital funding typically goes to white males in about 5 geographic areas, and so I've spent a lot of time mentoring female entrepreneurs and helping women in leadership make their way forward in business.
Thanks, Katy.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Elaine Barkley. I'm the Chief HR Officer for the Facility Partnership. I have been in HR for a number of years now, and really excited to be able to spend some time with you all today to talk about some of the trials and tribulations concerning gender parity, stereotyping, microaggressions. Certainly have a real passion for giving female leaders the opportunity within organisations to really shine through. But as Katy's already mentioned earlier today, that isn't at the fall of our male colleagues. So very much about promoting that gender parity and raising that awareness in the workplace. So looking forward to spending time with you all.
Thanks, Elaine. And finally, Amy.
Hi everyone, it's wonderful to be involved with so many other strong, powerful women. So I won an Olympic gold medal in the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver. And since then, so a majority of my life has been a full-time athlete. Since retiring in 2012, I have been going into businesses, talking, doing motivational talks, and then have recently, within this COVID year, shall we put it, have set up my own personal training business and really love and enjoy giving my passion of sport and health and fitness to other women and whilst juggling looking after 2 small children. So yeah, I'm kind of definitely a little juggler, but it's great to be involved today. I'm really looking forward to the event.
Brilliant. Thanks, Amy. And my name is Katy Tanner. I work for Robert Half and have done for almost 21 years. Started in the field as a consultant, worked up to director, and the last 3 years I've gone into leadership development, kind of pursuing my passion of psychology, mentoring and leadership development, really. And like Amy, a mother of 3 not so young children anymore. But the juggle, I think, is certainly the word that I'd probably surmise. However, saying that, they have gone back to school today. So today feels momentous, not only being International Women's Day, but the children going back to school. And I'm joined by Matt Robinson, who you can't see on screen, who's the producer of today's event. So he will come on later whilst we've got some live Q&A questions. So the next probably 40 minutes, we are going to answer questions that have kindly been submitted already by the people that have joined on the call today. And throughout that discussion, if you have a burning question, please submit it in the Q&A. And then around 1:45, 10 to 2, we will open for those live questions, and we will do our absolute best to answer all of those. So we've also got a couple of polls that we would love for you to participate in throughout the webinar today. So if you could do that, that will really help just bring to life our discussion. So I guess without further ado, we will kick off straight into our first question. So our first question, which I think is a brilliant way to start any webinar, is really about everyone's individual stories. So what has been some of your biggest career triumphs and challenges? So Amy, if I can start with you on that one, I'm sure you've got some great things to share. So
Yeah, I mean, clearly, or shall we say, stating the obvious, the kind of biggest career triumph would be winning my gold medal. And I think really it's more the hard work and everything that goes into that one moment in time that you have to perform at that one day. You have that one moment to put all of that hard work together. But ironically, almost like it felt a bigger achievement was the year before to win a silver medal in the World Championships. Actually, it was such a learning experience for me that 1 year before, and it made me realize these tiny little things that I needed to put together in order to be able to get the next level of the gold medal. And I think alongside that, which kind of ties in, it goes into those challenges actually. Again, not many people really realize that skeleton, winter sport, bobsleigh skeleton, we don't have an ice track in Great Britain. So as a nation, our biggest challenge is also that blatant, obvious thing in front of our eyes. Can't physically train like all the other nations. So we have to think outside the box. We have to see, well, how can we improve in so many different areas that still enables us? In the last 4 Olympics, women have brought home a medal in the last 4 Olympic Games, whether that's a bronze, a silver, a gold, and more golds to come. So that's been an incredible thing to realize that in this even COVID situation, if something obvious is staring you in the face, don't see it as a negative. How can you think outside the box and improve in all these tiny little areas of your life? And those little 1% areas of your life can become something quite big that can enable you to actually really achieve that main goal.
I think that's great. You know, that it's the journey, isn't it? I think we always focus on that ultimate goal, and whether it's a personal or professional one, I think often you then look back and realize it's actually the journey rather than always hitting the goal that kind of some of your greatest achievements or challenges, I guess, come from. So that was great. Thank you. Claire, would you be able to share some of your biggest career triumphs and challenges as well?
Absolutely. I'd say some of my biggest career triumphs have actually been through the mentoring that I've done and seeing how, as a strong woman in a male-dominated industry, I've enabled other women to equally get on within that profession. And I think that that's been a huge triumph for me personally, because it's mentoring them, making them feel that it's a safe environment, that they have someone that they can come and talk to and help them through those difficult situations that they find themselves in the workplace. And those challenges have been actually the things that have helped me with my triumphs, because I've also gone through those challenges myself as an individual very early on in my career. literally the only woman I met in IT for 10 years, made working in IT incredibly challenging. And I had to put up with those stereotypes and those probing questions about, was I going to leave and have children? And so why would they bother investing in me? We've all heard them. And I think those things, those challenges have actually been the things that have helped me with my career trance and bringing on other people.
And I think, I couldn't agree more. I think having a champion, a cheerleader, a mentor, whether it's a man or a woman in your career for a female, I think is hugely powerful. And to be able to share that, as you say, I'm sure early on in your career, it was quite lonely, as you say, for 10 years, perhaps being the only woman, to be able to help other women on their journey must be hugely gratifying. So I think we underestimate the power of mentoring and championing other women for sure. So okay, so building on that, I guess, what advice would you give your younger self? And Amy and Claire, it would be great if you could answer that, building on the question that we just asked. But if we all had the gift of traveling back in time, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think for me, what I learned sort of afterwards is the importance of really listening to your gut. That real gut feeling that we have inside of ourselves that either, tells you right from wrong, or, whether you just have that deep down feeling that I know this isn't the right decision. And I think for me, one of the biggest lessons was, again, just before the Olympic Games, where we had some brand new equipment come in. We had these brand new runners, which for us is like the tires on a car, is our runners on our sled. And so much money had gone into the research and development of these runners. On paper, they were quicker, but I hadn't had enough time to practice on them. And my gut instinct was just, don't change something just before the biggest race of your life. You haven't had time to practice. It's a bit like, don't wear a brand new pair of trainers just before a marathon because you'll get blisters, type of thing. So I think for me, that was the biggest decision of my life, was actually having the guts to say to everyone, I don't want to use them. I'm not going to use them. I want to stick to my Goldie oldies, my favorites. And, in hindsight, thank God that I really didn't. And I think very quickly, secondly, was to not focus all the time on other people. I missed out, I think, on the Turin Winter Olympics 4 years previously. One of the biggest things was because I was so obsessed by watching all the other girls, all the other women. And yes, you have to learn from other people, and we're all here to support and to learn from one another. But if you become obsessed by other people, it's not helping you. That person can't you go faster. My sled will not go down that track faster because I'm obsessing over other people. Only I can. So they're my two biggest lessons. Focus on you, and also just really listen to that true gut feeling inside of you, because it's always right.
Great lessons. And I would say, do you know what, that comes with age, I think, not focusing on other people as well. I think we've all been there where we're so focused on other people's journeys rather than our own. So I think for anyone else listening who's maybe early on in their career, that's a great couple of lessons there, listening to your gut and just worry about your own journey, because it's so different to everyone else's. Claire, what would you say to the younger Claire if you could go back in time?
I'd say always do something that you love. If you don't love what you don't do it well. So I would say pick something you love and do that and stick with it. And the enjoyment that you get from it makes you perform well at it. I'm sure Amy can resonate with that very well, because she obviously does something that she loves. And I think that you have career choices in your life, and sometimes you make them for the wrong reasons. And I think love has to come into it. You have to have a passion. If you don't have a passion, then it just becomes something that you resent doing, and you have to spend so much of your life in your career that you have to enjoy what you do. So I would say to myself, early on, I made some decisions that were wrong because I didn't choose what I loved at the time.
I think they say, don't they, find your passion, find your purpose. And again, sometimes you might take a different job for whatever reason, because it's convenient, or you're trying to work around, studies or families, but you're absolutely right. I think you find your way back there. But I think if you can realize that as you can. It's a great piece of advice. So we're going to move on to the next set of questions now. We had lots of questions come in around COVID and how that's specifically impacted women. So we're going to ask you all a question now, if you can just participate in the poll. And the poll is basically asking you, do you believe that COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted women? So you've got 4 options. You've got yes, significantly, yes, slightly, no, not at all, or unsure. So I'll just give that a minute just for everyone to take a moment just to select the option that they feel is most relevant to themselves. You could be answering this based on yourself, maybe the teams that you represent, maybe someone in your personal life that you've seen it impact, or maybe not at all. But it would be great, I think, just to see a flavour of how everyone on the call feels today. So I don't know if they're starting to come through, Matt.
Yeah, just almost pretty much everyone has voted. Just give me another 5 seconds.
Brilliant.
And I'll end the poll. So I'm going to end the poll now. And you should now see the results, Katie.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. So yes, significantly, 40%. We're not surprised to see that. I think every bit of research that I've been reading, it certainly has. And that doesn't mean that it's always affected women necessarily. There are some silver linings that I'm sure we'll discuss in a moment that come out of that. Not at all. It's great to see that some haven't been. That's fantastic. And unsure. So I think what would be great now, we're going to ask Katy and Elaine in their roles, if they've seen, whether personally or through their professional work, whether they've seen it, whether COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted women, and maybe some of the ways that you've experienced this or seen this within your teams or with yourselves. So I don't know if Elaine, you could answer that one first.
So for me, I guess to summarize, is it really is down to us as employers to try and, particularly again with today's poll as well, is to really shift away from the stereotyping, the gender bias, the microaggressions that do exist within organizations, and also society. And it's going to be down to us not just to push the D&I agenda, of which of course gender parity is one part of it. But it is super important, I think, that we take that ownership and responsibility to push that forward. And that goes much further beyond training, quite frankly. And again, I've got some tips that I can perhaps share on that a little bit later on.
Thanks, Elaine. I think you make a brilliant point. I think everything's right. When we first were talking about this panel and we were talking about this question, I know you were really passionate about the fact for you hadn't felt it personally, but you were acutely aware that you had women on your team or friends and colleagues who perhaps it had. And I think as employers, it's absolutely key that we understand that what might be for someone might not be for someone else. So, I think the poll pretty much summarized exactly the conversation we had. So thank you for that. Katy, I don't know if you've got anything you can add to that in your experiences that you've seen over the last, almost a year, how perhaps COVID has impacted women in particular.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real sort of passion project for me. And so I've done a huge amount of research. And I think you spoke briefly about the fact that McKinsey have done reports and UN Women have published a huge amount of information. I think, the facts speak for themselves. Globally, 70% of frontline workers are women. They're therefore going to be disproportionately impacted. Women on average globally do 3 times as much unpaid work as men. And so when the crisis hits, the school closures, stretched healthcare systems, they are naturally going to feel it more than the men are. And I think, they're more likely to be single parents or the primary caregiver, or more likely to experience domestic abuse. And we've seen, countries are reporting sort of 40% increases in incidences of domestic abuse during lockdown situations. So the facts speak for themselves. We know that this is definitely happening. I think I've been very fortunate, much like Elaine. It hasn't personally impacted me, and actually the places I've worked have been hugely supportive places, and therefore we've been able to do what we can to mitigate. But the thing that I've found really interesting is that in everyone that I've spoken to, and we used a HR consultancy at our company, and they were obviously working across multiple companies, all of the people that were asking to be furloughed for childcare were women. And I think that in itself speaks volumes. And I think this kind of burden of childcare falling on women has meant that the homeschooling has been a real challenge. And we've done everything we can in terms of making the workplace flexible and giving people, you know, as much support as we can to help that be as easy as it can be. But fundamentally, the burden has largely and on average fallen to the women, which is a challenge.
I couldn't agree more from everything that I've learned, and also personally, Katy, you know, I work, and I've got 3 children, and I would concur, despite having a partner that does really support, the bulk of it did land on my shoulders. And funnily enough, the 3rd lockdown, the first thing we did was have a bit of a talk about not quite going to be the same as the first 2 lockdowns, because I can't do that again. But I do think one of the positives for women that has come out of COVID-19 is showing how we can work more flexibly, that we don't have to, you know, slap on a train up to London. We could easily just come on and, you know, go on Teams or Zoom and partake in the meeting. So I hope that we will see, as we come out of this pandemic, more positives specifically for women that are caregivers, not necessarily mothers, but are caregivers who can have a bit more balance and still have, you know, a role that they're passionate about as well. So I'm hoping that we will see some silver linings for sure come out of it. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next question now, which is really, I guess, what we've all seen again. You know, the world has changed dramatically in the last year. So how do you think the future of work will impact women? And I think we've all experienced a shift to a more remote world, you know, a much greater need for flexibility. And we've all, you know, I guess, technology has become our tether to life, if you like, in terms of keeping us connected in our ability to work. So I guess what we'd love to kind of explore here is, what changes do we feel are here to stay? So Katy, I don't know if you could start with that one. In your experience, what do you think is here to stay in terms of the changes we've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is about where we work and how we work. I've seen a lot of polls. I've conducted them. I conducted them at my previous company in terms of where do people want to work. And actually what we've seen, I think very few people want to stay home working permanently all the time. I think we're all missing the camaraderie in the company of being in the office. But I think it's unlikely that people are going to want to return 5 days a week. And with that, you know, you alluded to it just a moment ago, increased flexibility and that ability to kind of manage our lives better around work. I think that's definitely something that's going to stay. It also it opens up the pool of candidates available to us. If we're not only hiring locally, we can suddenly start going further afield for talent. And I think one of the challenges we have in trying to address diversity in our workforce quite often is that we're limited to a small geographical pool that are very local to us. And so I think we can probably get greater diversity in our workforce by broadening that geographical pool. And that's much easier to do if you're remote enabled.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, as employers, we by default get much more choice, which you'd like to think that would naturally bring the balance. It should progress a little bit more, and not just around gender, but as Elaine alluded to earlier, around race and all the other things that we know there are huge imbalances in. So Amy, in your world of sport and PT, for you, what some changes do you feel are here to stay?
Yeah, I think obviously the biggest thing, I mean, I'm sat in my gym now, my doors had to shut. You know, I was able to do one-on-one for a little bit until we had to close. And actually, yeah, I had to get used to suddenly doing all these Zoom workouts through the computer. And although it was very strange to begin with, actually I've got into a really nice kind of rhythm with my clients. I have pretty much given them as much of my equipment as possible if they're my regulars. But I think the biggest thing is that it's proved actually, in terms of fitness and health and wellness, actually you can do some amazing workouts from home. You don't have to waste half an hour driving to the gym, you know, do your gym session, come back, especially as busy working mums or dads. So I think that's been the biggest thing, is that I've managed to create some amazing workouts with what people and clients have got in their own homes. So whether that is just grabbing a rucksack and filling it with heavy books, and suddenly you can create lump of heaviness that you can lift above your head, put on your back, do some squats, do some bicep curls, whatever it might be. Grab your 2 bottles of wine and do some tricep, you know, some working for your arms. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that it's taught us to be creative. You know, I spoke about before about thinking outside the box. Well, actually, you don't need to have a complicated gym. You can still have the most amazing workout. In 10 minutes, you can get your whole body burning and screaming. And that's all you need to do in that little lunch break. Or, you know, we can all put the kettle on, wait for the kettle to boil for a cup of tea, and do some press ups against your work surface. You know, it's very simple things that you can incorporate health and well-being, and get those endorphins flowing. You know, get those endorphins flowing to make you feel good, to make you feel happy, even though you feel like you might be trapped at home. I think it's just proven, just this list of things can boost your well-being, whether that's your kids doing it with you as you roll out a yoga mat, or on the hour, every hour for 5 minutes, I'm going to do 5 exercises, 10 things of each. You know, and I think that's what's really probably made me realize that could be here to stay, whether doing workouts over Zoom is here to stay, because it just suits people more, and actually it suits their life. The children can be asleep in bed. You don't have to go out, find a babysitter. You can just do a workout from your own living room.
And to your point, I think it just makes everything that little bit more manageable in terms of fitting it in that busy time. Although I'd love to think I could make a cup of tea and do press ups rather than eat a chocolate biscuit whilst instead of making the tea. But I think, you know, I think getting that flexibility and making everything much more manageable is for everyone, I hope, is something that's here to stay, as you say. You don't, you know, to have that time. I think time, we've all realised, our most valuable resource. You just don't get it back. So anything that gives you time back in your day is just hugely powerful. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next question now. And we've touched upon it a little bit around biases, stereotypes, and microaggressions. But what's an assumption, stereotype, or bias related to gender that you've witnessed, and how did you handle the experience? So as I said earlier, the theme for International Women's Day this year is Choose to Challenge, and it's really, I guess, a reminder that we're all responsible for our own thoughts, our own actions. And I guess, Elaine, if I ask you first, I don't know, you know, for you, again, whether it's from a personal perspective, or certainly those in your HR kind of career over the last 10 years or so, any assumptions, stereotypes, or biases that you've, you know, been party to, really?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to share a couple of stories with you briefly so that you can get a feel for the types of things that either I've witnessed or that have happened to me, equally that I've had to advise on over the years. And I'm sure, as I share a couple of them, there'll be lots of eye-rolling moments, or oh, okay, yeah, that happened to me too. So I guess that the one that kind of stands out to me the most is comments from a senior male colleague who suggested on several occasions that, you know, basically, Elaine, you should be at home with your family more. Okay, that's great. That's lovely that you want to balance my work life and everything. That's fantastic. Followed swiftly on a number of occasions by, but how does your husband feel that that he's basically now the primary care holder of your child, basically? To which point that got my goat, I'm not going to lie. The first time, because of where I was in my career, I'm going to be honest, I let it go, because I thought I didn't want to be that defensive female leader who you know, was just getting uppity and antsy because of a comment that was inappropriate. The second time it happened, I decided I chose to challenge, and I stood up, and in the words of Sheryl Sandberg, I leaned in and I was brave, and I made that individual abundantly aware, not just about the fact of how it was making me feel, but actually they had no right to stand and judge as to how I should manage my child and my parenting qualities and activities in line with my career, and that, you know, had I been a man, would he have had that same conversation? So I gave them a gift to make them realise that actually, you know, that the I'm sure the intent was there, but actually how it was received, again, is back to that kind of stereotyping around women being the main care holder. The other, just very was I had to advise someone who came to me and said, "Hey Elaine, do you know, I've just witnessed something and I'm not quite sure how to deal with this," which was a senior colleague, male colleague. And again, I'm not trying to do any disservice to our male colleagues today, just to be clear, but a male colleague walked into a client meeting and saw a woman around the table and basically looked at her and said, "Oh, can you get me a coffee, love? I'll take it white with 1 sugar." Unfortunately for him, and after a little bit of an awkward silence, he didn't realise that that was an MD of one of the other group entities that he was about to pitch to. So suffice to say, that day, after a grueling couple of hours of why they should indeed, go ahead and work with that individual for further business, that leader got a very valuable lesson that day about stereotyping, and he didn't repeat it again, that's for sure. And there's those things in the workplace, and then obviously outside of work, if again, go in and buy a car, bugs me something rotten when I go out and buy a car and they want to talk to my husband and not me, to the point I just turn on my heel and walk out the door. But there are lots of things that happen, but I just thought I'd share some of those stories to bring it into context. But absolutely, it's up to each and every one of us, as Katy said, to be brave, to be courageous, and absolutely choose to challenge. Sometimes people are saying things because of their heritage, how they've grown up, and they don't really think about what they're saying is actually either inappropriate, or it could offend someone, or stereotyping. They haven't been educated, hence my earlier comment around it's up to us as organisations to really educate people. And that goes far beyond, as I say, the training online. This is about how do we create a coaching culture within our organisations where people can actually be comfortable being uncomfortable around the whole diversity and inclusion agenda.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, it's the power of education and understanding around all of these things around inclusion and diversity. And I think, we've all got some personal examples, personally or professionally, like you've just shared. And I think it's some of those, I think, certainly the ones I've experienced, the intention was never from a male colleague necessarily to make me feel uncomfortable or bad, but the perception, not quite as the guy who asked to make a cup of tea and was actually the person they were pitching to have been a fly on the wall in that room. But I think absolutely, I think the power of education in this, and whether that's schools, I've got 2 daughters myself, and they will learn about this today at school. I have a son too, and he said today, "Mummy, I know it's International Women's Day." I really pride myself that my little boy knows as much as my daughters. I think the power of education at school and in work, absolutely, and our roles in that is absolutely key. So yeah, great points. Katy, I don't know if you've also in your roles, personally or professionally, witnessed or been seen some kind of stereotyping and unconscious bias too?
Yes, yeah, definitely. I was sort of laughing at the story that Elaine told about the cups of tea. I was in my previous role, we were based in an incubator in the early stages with a number of kind of startup companies. And I very quickly befriended a fellow female entrepreneur. And her and I spent a lot of time together, and we used to both get very frustrated by the fact that whenever anybody came in the building as a visitor, they would automatically make a beeline for one of us to ask where they should be going, because obviously we were the receptionists for the business. That was it was a slightly frustrating situation. I think, I echo what you guys have said around, I think these are very rarely done with malice. We all have a different lens that we look at the world through. And I think we've made huge leaps and bounds over the last few years in terms of kind of getting this equality. I mean, we're not there yet, but we've certainly moved a long way. And if you think back to, what it was like to work in an office in the 80s for a woman and where we are now, things are very, very different. And yet there are still people in the workforce who were around then. And so I really do understand how for some people it can be different for them. They're having to educate themselves and think differently. And I think what's really critical for us is every single one of us as an individual taking responsibility to challenge, not necessarily aggressively. We don't need to come at people with kind of any accusation or judgment, but just ask the question and make them think about things. And had a great bit of feedback actually recently. I was being interviewed for a role, and during the interview I was asked a question, and I forget what the question exactly was, but it was something related to age and kind of level of seniority. And I just remember thinking at the time, I don't feel comfortable about this question. And I just sort of said in the interview, you know, I'm genuinely curious. I'd really like to know if you'd be asking me that question if I was a man. And the person who was interviewing me kind of took a step back and went, do you know, I'm not sure I would actually. And we kind of just, that was it. The moment was over and it went out of my head. And it wasn't until I had some feedback with the person that they said, that for me was a moment when I knew I wanted to work with you, because you challenged in that moment and you made me think. And I thought, actually, you're making me want to do things differently. You're making me grow as an individual. And it wasn't aggressive. It wasn't a difficult accusatory moment. It was just you know, have you thought about this? And so it can be a really positive thing sometimes, I think.
Well, I think it's really powerful, and I think Claire touched upon it earlier. It's about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, because whenever you talk about anything around diversity and inclusion, we all, to Elaine's point, have been brought up a certain way, educated a certain way. You know, it's not to point fingers or blame. We all have stereotypes. You know, we'd be naive to think that we don't, but actually it's getting to a point where you can question someone, you know, pose a question like you did and go, do you know what, I don't know if I would, apologies, and you can move on from that. And that's such a point to educate, that, as you say, it didn't need to be aggressive. And I also think it's knowing what points to challenge on, to Amy's point earlier. Anything that makes you feel uncomfortable or awkward or you know, doesn't sit with you well, it's having the confidence to think, do you know what, I've got to say something now. If I can't say it for myself, I've got to say it for the people that I'm responsible for, or whatever it might be. So yeah, great question. It's great that it made you want to hire them too.
Yeah.
I hope you continue to challenge. They're going to, at some point, you're going to do that again. They're going to think, oh, why did I hire her? Because you'll keep going. Because I've had that as well. They're thinking, oh, can you just not do it anymore? But great answers. So we're going to move on to the next question now. And it's actually, we're going to ask a poll first before we go into the question. I'm just going to click that off. So what do you personally believe is the biggest challenge for men and women to overcome as we move towards gender parity in 2021 and beyond? So as you can see, there are 5 options on the screen. Now, it might be that you feel all of these, because I know probably I do, but go for the one that you feel the most passionate about. So whether it be economic inequality, lack of women in positions of power, navigating career and motherhood or caregiving, gender stereotypes and bias like the ones we've just discussed, or educating on gender balance and keeping it as a top priority in business and education. So if you could all just take a moment just to click which one of those you personally feel is the biggest challenge right now for us as women and men to overcome as we try and forge towards more gender parity in 2021 and beyond. So we'll just give that a minute or so just for the results to come through. I think we probably all have one that resonates probably more than the others. That's not to say that the others aren't important. I don't know if they're coming through, Matt.
Yeah, they're through. I'm just about to close the poll, so give it a couple of seconds. Yep. Okay, so just closing the poll, and you should now see the results, Katy.
Wow, okay. So the biggest one, navigating career, motherhood and caregiving, absolutely. Next one, lack of women in positions of power. And I wonder if we had more women in positions of power, if that would naturally help the navigating career and motherhood options. Gender stereotypes. So we're pretty split. Interestingly, I would have thought perhaps gender pay gap or economic inequality might have been a little bit higher, just from kind of the, you know, what we've gone through in the UK over the last couple of years. But I don't know, Elaine, if there's anything on there that really resonates for you in terms of any of those 5 options on there that have come through the results.
I think the one I'm probably most surprised about, and I saw there was a question earlier on as well, is around educating on the gender balancing a top priority. I would have expected that to have been a little bit higher. Again, only from my experiences and you know, colleagues and acquaintances, is that people talk a good game when they talk about gender parity outside of things like the gender pay gap, as an example. But when it comes to the broader spectrum of bias and stereotypes, and I'm talking the whole D&I piece again, I'm sorry, because I think it does, there is a piece there that it's linked, and it is required to be educated on. I think yeah, I'm just surprised that one is so low, because people, as I say, talk about it, but I think in my experience people don't always aren't able to embed it properly within the organization, beyond some online e-learning. I don't know if anyone has come across the work of Luana Harris before, who talks about the commit model, but she basically has a really interesting book that's called Diversity Beyond Lip Service, and they use a very simple methodology called commit, and it's basically embracing a coaching culture, around all of these facets that we've been talking about today. So be comfortable in uncomfortable scenarios, be uncomfortable not knowing that your colleague isn't fully aware of how someone is being made to feel because of their race and ethnicity. Anyway, it's something, if I had to give a tip today, I would really go away and have a look at that book. It's very good, and it's a very simple model that you can take to really translate into the workplace, to find ways of getting the topics such as this higher on the agenda.
Absolutely.
That's a long answer to your question, I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. And I wonder if this is a snapshot because of the year we've had, that navigating career and motherhood and caregiving so high up, you know, to Katie's
Agreed.
point earlier, I think 70%, you know, frontline NHS workers are women, the bulk of homeschool and all of that kind of falling on women. So I think it's perhaps a little bit skewed this year, but, you know, I think we'd all agree they're all incredibly important. It's just, you know, making sure that we all do the best that we can, whether we're, you know, a man or woman in a leadership position or not, to really forge that forward. So we're going to go on to our last question now. So I would just encourage, we've only had 2 questions come through on the Q&A. So if you could just, if you've got any extra questions that you'd like to have answered in the next kind of 10-15 minutes, please put them in the Q&A box so we can answer those. So our last question, which I'm actually going to ask everyone on the panel to answer, he links really well with the question that we've obviously just asked previously around stereotypes, gender bias. But what's the best way to be a champion or an ally for gender equality? So Claire, I didn't know if I could start with you. I know you spoke earlier about the importance of mentoring. So for you, what would be the best way to be a champion or ally for gender equality?
I think it's to be a really positive role model for other people coming up through the ranks. I think it's really important, and I know I said this earlier, but I think I don't just mentor ladies, by the way. I have a young gentleman at the moment that's recently out of university. So, you know, I think mentoring as a woman, mentoring young people that are coming into the workplace and helping with their understanding of gender equality is important. And I think that and helping educate through that process and seeing them flourish is really important, because they take that away and they in turn mentor. They turn from mentee to mentor, and they take those really rich experiences that they've gained and they spread them out. And so it, you know, it's a bit like the family tree, isn't it? More and more people get influenced and get that that support from that person that they need. I mean, I still have a mentor now, who happens to be a man, but I still have a mentor now, and I've had one through most of my working life. And I think that it's incredibly important, and that's why I give back, because I saw the importance for myself.
I could not agree more, Claire. And I think it's irrelevant sometimes if they're a woman or a man. I think it's someone who shares their story, their successes, their, and it's who you click with. Gender's on a spectrum. So I think the gender of the mentor and mentee is irrelevant, but if you click, but I couldn't agree more. I think having someone who's not your boss or someone who's not linked to you personally can have a huge empowering, enriching experience for you. So absolutely. Amy, I don't know, for you in the world of sport, in the world of PT, what you feel is really important in terms of championing women, young girls, in your field?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one. I think one of the biggest things is the potential, the dropout of women and females and girls in sport, especially as they're going through that puberty, as their bodies are changing, how yes, typically it's more about going out and having fun and going out on a Friday night. And as they watch their bodies change, I think the biggest thing in sport is that you might have to become more muscular. You might have to put on more weight because for your sport to be strong and powerful. And I think actually that's been a little thing that has changed recently, is actually the fitness in younger people has increased. So I think that's a kind of an area, especially in youth. I think, I do work for Dame Kelly Holmes Trust, which is all about using athletes to go into communities, going into schools and helping young people do projects for their communities, whether it's sport related or not. And I think it's just really helping young women in particular, but it's the boys as well, to have that kind of positivity around them, to have that support and inspiration to be able to look up for, and to give them the tools that they know how to go on into their life. And then I think on another flip side, on a kind of bigger commercial side, is, TV viewings times. How much of TV these days in sport is still men's football, men's rugby, men's cricket? Look at the back pages of the newspapers. It's all the male dominated sports. And yet the females, the women are the ones bringing home the World Cups, the getting into finals. And, our women rugby players and cricket players and football players and netball players are incredible. And yet they don't get the same amount of commercial time on TV. Therefore, none of them are getting, the women England rugby players, their wages are absolutely nothing compared with that of the men. And they're similar in so many different sports. So I think until we change the powers to be above, who suddenly realize the importance of, how exciting and entertaining the women are as much as the men, that just needs to really start to flick over and get that balance, more equal.
Well, that airtime, that spotlight, absolutely, because the more awareness there is, that in theory would then encourage young girls. I've got a 13-year-old daughter, she's still very much into her sport, but I'm very conscious over the next couple of years that may well change, and it's how do you keep that going?
Totally. Yeah. And I think that is the real kind of, I go into schools and I give talks, and, whether it's just the end of their year, shaking hands and it's their presentation award evening or something, but I think that is really, really important. And I'm writing a book now for teenage children about how to help them with high performance, how to help them with sport, whether it's male or female, boys and girls in that kind of real critical teenage years. It's kind of something that's really close to my heart, that I have a lot of passion for, to be able to try and help them.
That's wonderful. So in the spirit of time, Elaine and Claire, I'm not going to ask you that question because I think it'd be great if we could get to some of the live questions that have come through. So thing that we just like to mention at Robert Half before we go to the live questions is, we're really proud today and really excited that we are launching, as part of Global International Women's Day, our own official launch of the UK Global Women's Employee Network, which is, is an acronym of GWEN. So for us internally, we know the purpose very much is to champion and amplify women's perspectives, hence why we're so passionate about hosting these webinars, and highlighting International Women's Day today, but really to give that space, that time to educate, share ideas, share perspectives, offer support and opportunities where people can grow regardless of their stage of career, professionally and personally. So for any of you that are on the call today that work for Robert Half, please watch, have a look out in your inbox, because there'll be more to come today regarding joining Gwen and the opportunities that hopefully we can support you with. With that, I think it would be great, Matt, if we could go to some live questions. I've seen some that have come through this morning. So it would be wonderful if we could go to some of those.
Okay, so first question I've got is, how do you think that moving forwards, talking about mental health is seen not as a weakness, but as a strength? And how women are not seen as weak for sharing their thoughts and feelings in the workplace, but as strong and honest. So how do you think, talking about mental health is not seen as a weakness, but a strength? I don't know who would like to pick that one up.
I'd like to comment on this, because I quite openly suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, because I was in a very bad crash in '99 that I was fortunate enough to survive, and survive is definitely the word I would use. I have suffered for over 20 years with really bad PTSD, and I openly talk about it because I think it's incredibly important that people understand that your mental health doesn't define you as a person. It's something you live with. If it was diabetes, if it was another kind of illness, it's so much more socially acceptable for you to suffer. But when it comes to mental illness, it's a very taboo subject. So I tell people when I go for interviews that I suffer from it. I tell them that it affects me very little day to day. I do occasionally have a flare up, but I do speak openly about it. And I think we have to get away from the stigma of it and treat it like it is an illness. As I said, like in another kind of illness, it's doesn't define people. It's just something that they have to live with, and we just have to kind of be more accepting. So that's how I'm trying to deal with it, and I'm very open. And I find most people, if I speak to them about it, even at interview stage, it doesn't stop me getting a role, because I've been open. In fact, I think it's probably more endearing that I am that open about it. But I know it is difficult for people to talk about it, and we need to do something about that, absolutely.
And I think with everything that we've been through this year, I think the rise of mental health for everyone is hugely much more on the agenda. So I think, having the courage to openly talk about it, as you say, whether it's diabetes, a chronic illness, whatever it might be, it's the same. So I think that awareness and understanding is huge. Matt, next question.
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions around mentorship. So just to summarize the questions, what advice would you give to people who want to find a good mentor? How do they identify a good mentor for themselves?
I can answer that one only because perhaps that's what I do as my job internally within Robert Half. So my advice would be, look out for someone you admire, you look up to, you maybe someone who you click with on a personal level, and it's about sharing time together. It's not about the mentor being forced to spend time with the mentee. So I think it's absolutely something that you should do. I think, I've probably had 3 or 4 mentees in my time at Robert Half, and not one of them has been my direct boss, because I think the power of having a mentor is you can be totally transparent. You're not worried that that person's going to make a decision based upon what you've said, but they have an understanding still of the corporate world or the professional world that you're in. So I think for me, a mentor is there to inspire you, but also to help learn from their experiences. So, but for me, I think it's down to you individually to go seek that mentor rather than wait for someone to organize that for you. In our company, we have a function that you would say you'd like to be mentored. We can set it up, but I appreciate not everyone works for a company that can do that. So I would say be proactive and seek someone out.
I was just going to say, I think it's quite different in the sporting world. I'm a mentor for a lot of all our youth athletes coming in British Skeleton. And it, like Katy was saying, it's the fact that they feel that they can talk to me a lot more than someone else in power, the coach or support staff. And you're someone who knows exactly how they feel. You've been through it before. You're not going to judge them. The smallest of worries you can answer honestly. And I think it's kind of, I feel like I'm a big sister to them all, that I always say I'm at the end of the phone whenever you want, whenever you need, whether I do specific coaching, sort of help mentor sessions with them, or whether it's just that knowing someone's always there. And actually on another day, I've got a corporate talk that I'm doing next week with Babcock International. So a huge, big company, and they've got a new policy. Mental health is really important for them. And I'm designing what I'm going to say to them in my talk. But they said their biggest quote tagline at the moment for them in a company is you bring your whole self to work. So it's their new thing for them is to say, actually, you bring your whole self to work, male and female. The mental side of it for them is a massive side that they're pushing. And I was so shocked and surprised that that was a really big thing for them now. And maybe especially in this last year that they've realized that you have to bring your whole being to work and that you can talk about that mental side. So, yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to next week hearing more from them and how almost a week too late for now. But, that's a really lovely thing to heard from a big company.
Great. Well, I'm really sorry. We're almost at the hour. In the spirit of being punctual, sadly, we've run out of time. The questions I can see on there, we could have continued throughout the afternoon. So we will endeavour to get back to the questions that we haven't been able to answer live today. As I said earlier, I hope everyone gets a personal takeaway. I know for me, it would absolutely be the power of education around gender balance and stereotypes, whether that's in schools, whether that's in organisations, in the home. The power of mentoring, having that cheerleader, that champion. And for any men that are on the call today, if you have, all of you will hopefully have daughters, wives, sisters, but if you have any females that directly report into you and you're in a senior position, please reach out and mentor them. It's really powerful to have that. It doesn't have to just be women in those mentoring roles. I think it would be a brilliant reverse mentoring process to go through, because I think you would learn as much as they would. But I think everyone absolutely has a role to play. So I guess all that is left for me to say is a heartfelt to Amy, Elaine, Claire and Katy for being so honest, so authentic and sharing their stories today. We really do appreciate it. For those of you on the call that maybe would like to hear more about International Women's Day, we have a series of these panels going out through the rest of the week. We have one on Wednesday, one on Thursday, and we do have really one other exciting one. We actually get to hear from Helen Plankhurst, who's the Senior Advisor at Care International, but also the great-granddaughter of Emily Plankhurst. So if you would like to hear more details about those, please reach out. So have a great afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you for joining, and thanks to Amy, Elaine, Claire and Katy. Thanks, everyone.